I'd like to welcome everyone to the January 12th regular meeting of the Rutland City School Board of Commissioners. So I'd like to call the meeting to order, and we will start with a Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. As far as the roll call, all commissioners are in attendance with the exception of Commissioner Kiefaber and Schimpf. So then next up would be a motion for approval of the agenda.
So move.
Second.
Okay. Ann?
Could I just ask you to pull out the minutes from the previous meeting for just a minor correction, please?
Can someone mute? There's all I can hear is a lot of loud feedback. Thank you. So the motion on the floor is to approve the agenda. Anne has requested the removal of the previous meeting minutes for a minor correction.
I amend my motion to include pulling out those minutes.
Thank you, Hurley. And do we have a second? Brittany? Okay, thank you. So on the floor now is the approval of the agenda minus the previous meeting minutes, which we will take up and see the adjustments after. So all those in favor of the consent agenda? And any opposed? Okay, great. So that passes unanimously. So then the next up would be the minutes of the previous meeting. So Anne?
Thank you. On the second page in the central office superintendent's report, I think that the names of the students were reversed. I think Giovanni is the first scholar, Vermont Presidential Scholar, and Alicia is the CTE Vermont Scholar.
That's correct.
Okay, so the motion on the floor would be to adjust those names with the awards, the appropriate awards. Is there a second? Brittany? Thank you. So the motion on the floor is to amend the minutes to adjust the students' names to reflect the appropriate award opposite of what is in the minutes. All those in favor? Any opposed? Sorry, I lost my screen for a second there. All right, so I'm sorry, any opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously. Okay, so the next thing on the agenda is communications. And we did not have anyone register, any members of the public register to address the board. So there's none there. And then we are on to school program updates. And first up are the student representatives. So I will turn it over to Hannah and Isabella.
Thank you. Starting with Rutland Intermediate School. Before RIS left for the holiday break, we received a very generous donation from Jones's Donuts. They provided every student a cookie decorating kit to take home. We've had a smooth transition back after the break and also have had several remote learners transition to in-person learning. We have seen success with our commitment to restoration approaches and PBIS. Our character traits this month are courage and perseverance. And we look forward to third grade's virtual assembly explaining these traits at the end of the month. Northeast and Northwest students returned from the December break refreshed and ready to learn. At Northeast, the character traits being focused on during the month of January are hard work and perseverance. And at Northwest, the focus is on chill and assertiveness. Northeast and Northwest students have been hard at work reading, writing, and completing Zern math missions. Many assessments are completed at the primary school this month, and progress reports go home at the end of the month.
Hi, so the middle school term is ending January 28th, and this past term was focused on the students' personal interest projects, also known as PIP. They've been sharing their STEM or humanities projects with other students and enjoyed focusing on studies that they were passionate about. One student, Janiyah Fitzgerald, was recognized for her impact on the PIP program in our community. Janiyah wanted to support the Trevor Project, an organization focused on suicide prevention among the LGBTQ+ population. She partnered with a local business and raised almost $300. Virtual Student Council, led by Katie Gino and Marissa Aston, was able to put together food baskets for 19 families that included groceries for the holiday vacation and a holiday meal. We wanted to highlight the good work done by our Bridges students. They have contributed 72 hours of volunteering at the Rutland Recreation Department and 186 hours helped with the Rutland Meals on Wheels. Rutland High School Speech and Forensics, run by Ms. Cassell and Mr. Eisenman, has had many successes during this year's season. Ben Honsinger learned from his first tournament and pulled through a victory this week in radio division. John Cotter won his second competition in a row in the extemporaneous speech category, speaking on 3 different topics in 3 rounds. Abed Alawi showed success in impromptu, placing 3rd, and participating in prose, a new category. Student Senate, run by Ms. Haskell and Mr. Aday, held a gift giveaway prior to break. Hannah and I both were able to participate, and we were able to distribute 100 gifts to families in the area. Winter sports practices have begun, and we are waiting to hear whether or not we'll be able to compete. Arrangements are underway to allow for live feed broadcasting of these events.
Great. Thank you, Hannah and Isabella, for the updates from on the grounds at the schools. So next up is the athletic activities and athletics report. So I don't know if you wanted to lead into that, Bill, or if we're just turning it over to Coach Norman.
Sorry, Allison, I lost my screen there. No, I want to thank Mike for being here tonight. And I also, as an introduction, I just want to thank Mike and the whole activities and athletics team that have provided kids a lot of good opportunities during the pandemic. This is another piece of the puzzle that is really important to kids. And you really see it right now with, the way that the world is shut down a little bit. This is a great outlet for kids. So Mike is going to report tonight on the progress of the year, and I'll hand it over to Mike. Mike, I think you're muted. Sorry.
I'm sorry. Just like to say thank you for having me. Rob, if you could just move it to the next screen, please. And that's the Athletic and Activities Council. That's made up of teachers, coaches, faculty members, school board members, student representatives. We're going to be getting together next month. Due to COVID and the pandemic, it's been a little bit difficult to get together with everything that's been going on. But it's a good segue between issues that are arising in the community and then the school board. And just it's been a lot of fun to get to know a lot of different people, and we're equally represented between athletics and clubs, activities, the fine arts, and all the co-curriculars there. You could just go to the next page, Mr. Bliss. That page there is from 2019, 2020, last school year. And basically what you see in front of you is, activity participation. There were 104 students that participated in one sport, and you could see there was one student that participated in 10 activities. And then below that, the number of people that participated in one athletic team in the fall, and then the number of kids that participated in 2. I think the numbers are down a little bit, just quite honestly, because we did not have a spring sports season. And, again, our enrollment last year was 838 students, and the total of kids that were participating were 406. And if you, just for a point of reference or comparison, the next screen is from the year prior, 18-19, and you can see those numbers are up from 48 point whatever percent up to 57.87%. And again, I would agree with the Bill, Mr. Olson, that to me now more so than ever, co-curriculars, sports, fine arts, clubs, activities are the lifeblood of what a lot of these kids have going on. It's made it more difficult, certainly with COVID, and kids here all the time, at home all the time, and some kids doing hybrid. But I think our numbers are pretty good, and they're pretty consistent. I went back and looked at the numbers from the past, and they're pretty similar. I think the numbers, comparatively speaking, to people that live in our county, I think our programs are as strong or stronger than most. Certainly, there could be some room for improvement, and I think when we come through on the other side here of COVID, I think things will only get better. I think it also speaks to how well-rounded our students are, and they do a lot of different things, like the 2 young women that are school board representatives. If you could just move it to the next screen, please. That sheet there talks about academic achievement. Typically, and last year we only did it for the seniors because the spring was just a different situation. How we're going to handle that is that if I was a junior and I had good grades, but I didn't get to play baseball or lacrosse, but as a senior I play baseball, lacrosse, and my grades are there, then I would qualify to get a letter, certainly, and to be a tri-scholar athlete. That was a decision that was made around the time of graduation. So last year we had 15 graduating seniors that, they were on the honor roll all year long, and that they were tri-scholar athletes. They played 3 sports, and then there were quite a few of them that were tri-scholar athletes during their entire high school career. And to me, being the athletic director, that side of the house is that, to me, that's the epitome of what we're trying to do. We're just trying to get people that are well-rounded, doing a lot of different things and doing that at a very high level. Beneath that is the Academic Achievement Award for activity hours. You have to get 120 hours, community service hours, during the course of the school year. And then we had 17 seniors that, much like the tri-scholar athlete, qualified for that. And then there are those folks that are AAA award winners all 4 years. And again, just like the young woman that was a part of 10 clubs or activities, I just don't know when these kids get to sleep, but they do it. And I think it'll, once we get back to normal here, we'll be in pretty good shape. If you could move to the next screen, please. What these are, and again, I won't really get into it, but it's just athletics enrollment by gender. For the high school is up top, the middle school is below. We would like to have our numbers increase. Again, the enrollment here, having been here a long time, the enrollment numbers here are pretty similar to when I first started here back in 94, 95, 96, somewhere in that age group. But I think our numbers are strong. It tells you exactly how many freshmen, for instance, play football, sophomores, juniors, seniors, and then what the total is. And when we get to a slide further on, sometimes like a freshman could be on the freshman team, and he could also be on the JV team, or somebody could be on the JV team and they could be on the varsity team. So sometimes kids are counted multiple times. And again, we did not have spring sports, so we just cannot provide that information for you. And if you go to the next slide, it's a similar slide in regards to activities, and talks about how many students, participated in the art club. 16 and 18, 19, we went to 23. sometimes the clubs are not run just due to a lack of interest, and sometimes we add other clubs because there is an interest there. There is a process to start a club here. Typically, the students, it's student driven. They find somebody that's going to volunteer to be an advisor, and typically it's 1 to 2 to 3 years to kind of justify the existence of the club, and then the stipend. I would go to the school board, I'd go to superintendent of schools, or I'd go to the principal first and talk about it, and then I would request that there would be a stipend given there. But there have been times that we have one club finished and another club began. And you can see the count there. There were 457 students at the high school that were in a club or activity. You can move to the next slide, please. And then what this talks about is a staff analysis. Basically, how many kids are playing these different sports, how many teams we have at the high school level, how many teams we have at the middle school level, and then how many coaches that we have. Again, depending upon sport, those things kind of fluctuate over time. And as you can see in the far right-hand outside of the margin there's an asterisk. And what that means is that there may be only one stipend for one assistant coach. And then what they do is they take that stipend and they split it in half and, give it to a middle school coach and then have a varsity assistant. If you could just move it to the next slide, please. And then again, I think a real hidden gem in our program here at the high school, and I think it's something that we all take for granted, starting with myself, is that we have great athletic training services provided by VOC and iSport. Tyler White is our athletic trainer, and he is here on a daily basis along with student trainers from Castleton. They're at many of our games, many of our practices. Again, an ideal situation would be is that we would have a trainer at every practice at every site, but that's just not feasible due to two things. One certainly would be cost, and two would be just the lack of numbers. But I think the situation that we have is a good one. The nice thing that we have here is that our booster club, for the most part, is provided a lot of modalities for Tyler and his staff to use to help our kids get better. And then the other nice thing that we have is that we have an inside track. If our kids get hurt, they have the ability to go through Tyler, and Tyler can typically get them in to VOC or the appropriate medical professional in a much quicker fashion than if I were just to try to do it just calling on the phone. I know that's kind of short and sweet, but if anybody has any questions or concerns, I'd be more than happy to answer them for you.
Okay. Any board members? Thank you, Coach Norman. Any board members have any questions for Mike?
Allison, it's Brittany. My video is acting up, but I just wanted to thank Mike and the staff for really trying to get the kids involved. I think it's a great report, and it shows that the kids really want to participate in their sports, even through the pandemic. And I would agree that for mental health purposes, it's an awesome thing to have. So thank you, Mike, and to the rest of the team and coaches and everybody.
No, and again, I coached during the fall, and somebody asked me if it was a waste of time, and I said no, by far not. It's probably one of the biggest life-changing events for me. Kind of made you go back to ground zero and why you're doing what you're doing. And I think our coaches, but our kids really did a nice job. And you can see that we've had winter sports going on for about 3 weeks. This is week number 3. Everybody's itching to start having contact and having games, but as I said to some coaches and I said to some kids, having practice certainly is better than having nothing at all. And then once, they think about it for about a half a second, they kind of nod their head, but it wouldn't be possible without your support.
Absolutely. Thanks, Mike.
Any other board members have any questions? No. I did have a question for you, Mike. I appreciate you getting the stats for us on individual students, not double counting them and things. That really helps. Is there, so around the 50% mark, is there any, if you will, like standard or any goal or, what industry is not the word, but what are other high schools looking like for the amount that they're able to engage students, or what is considered?
No. I don't know if it's realistic or not, but I would like every student that goes to Rutland High School, the middle school, and all the sending schools to be involved in something to kind of fulfill that whole, educational process. I think we're in a good spot. Is there certainly room for improvement? Yes. Our numbers are probably better than some, but not as good, as others. Again, because of our school size, probably the schools that we, have done some comparisons to along the way, Mount Anthony, Brattleboro, Burton, then certainly the schools up in Chittenden County. But I think our numbers are pretty consistent. Again, the difference, being the old guy here, year 27, for instance, in football, when I first started here in 94, 95, the school was brand new. We had 750 students. We had 125 playing football, 60 or 70 playing boys soccer and girls soccer. And all those numbers have decreased. I just think it's a different day and age and a different world. I think technology and social media and things of that nature, we could talk about that forever. But certainly if anybody has any suggestions or things that we would like to do to try to improve enrollment, last year at the school board meeting that, we were talking about having an open house and with clubs and sports. And we do that typically for the incoming ninth graders when they're in the 8th grade, when they come and look at the school. But it was almost, to do that in the fall when school first began to try to generate some interest from the kids, that are here. And again, every day, we've had like I said, we've had basketball for 2 weeks plus now, but we haven't officially had tryouts. So every day there's a couple more kids that are figuring it out or dealing with whatever they're dealing with, and they're coming out. And, I think, like I said to Bill earlier before the meeting began, getting these kids involved to me is the key to success, getting them engaged. Having been here this year during the fall when things were kind of normal, a lot of kids in school every other day. I think after Thanksgiving and subsequently since then, it's been on the decline because people have made choices that, that work for them. But certainly, if we can get back to there when the weather gets better, I think it would be good for everybody.
Great. Thank you, Mike.
Yep.
Okay. So the next up on the agenda is school choice limits. And I'm looking for the paper there. I don't know if I saw it, to be honest. Just look electronically.
Allison?
Yeah, do you have it to share?
I don't. Steve, do you have that?
I found it electronically. I don't think it's in my physical packet. So.
Does the rest of the board have it?
Yeah. Has everyone else seen it? Got a chance to review it? Okay. So our job tonight is the state sets the limit on the outbound based on the size of the school, and the board has to set the limit for the incoming students. There was some discussion regarding this last year because the deadline was missed before it was realized that there were kids on the waiting list and some questions or discussions of adjusting our incoming limit. So, so currently our inbound limit is 40 and the state transfer out limit is set by the state at 40. And we did have students on a wait list last year. I don't know if Bill or Rob could give us an update maybe of this year's numbers. I think, is it probably on here? I think.
Yeah, it's on the second page, and
Okay.
Steve Sampson is here with us too. Steve kind of manages this at the high school.
Perfect.
And those numbers are Steve's numbers that he presented in October, and they're really not changed. But Steve, I don't want to speak for you if you want to add anything else to that.
Yeah, I really think there's only been one minor change, and that is an inbound student has transferred down south to the Florida area. But other than that, the numbers are the same. And we have a student on the wait list who will assume that student spot. So we'll still be at 40 inbound students. And we're then at 14 outbound students at this time.
And is there a current wait list? I mean, obviously that could change because people might change their mind, but of what?
Yeah, I believe there are 13. We started the year with 15 on the wait list, and I think we're at 13 now on the wait list. And it's difficult to say what a wait list would look like for next year because we're just starting the application process now.
Okay, great. Thank you,
And
Steve.
the applications are due at the end of February.
Okay. So our job for the board is to set the inbound limit of the number of students that we will allow with school choice to come to Rutland City Public Schools for the high school. So I would entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion that we set our limit at 40.
And is there a second? Charlene, thank you. Okay, so the motion on the floor is that we set our incoming student choice limit at 40. Any discussion from any members of the board? Joanne? I have Joanne, Matt, and Ann.
I don't remember who brought this up last time, but I thought it was a good point. It looks like they're pretty evenly throughout on the paper that we got, grades 9, 10, 11, and 12. But I didn't know, one of you brought this up about setting limits per grade. So, and if that's possible, like, 12 per grade or 10 per grade or something like that, because wouldn't that, we have to think about the incremental cost. And it doesn't cost any extra money to have a few kids in a grade, but if we could end up with 20 kids in grade 10, let's say, that might all of a sudden make a change in our costs. Whereas if they're more evenly dispersed, I think someone brought that up last time and I thought it was a good point. So I just wanted to ask about that and see how people felt about that and what the administrators, if that is something that is a feasible thing to do, or if that's even within our purview.
Bill?
It's allowable by the law. And I think we can set those kind of parameters based on what we think our needs are. And that might be especially appropriate in a smaller school where you're worried about overloading the 12th grade or whatever. Currently, I think we're fairly, like you said, Joanne, pretty close to even 12, 8, and 8 through the 4 grades. So we're going to lose 12 kids this year, Steve, and there'll be 12 openings basically, unless somebody else drops out of the system.
And so you don't anticipate that being an issue then?
But my only worry would be if you said, all right, let's say 10, 10, 10, and 10, and you, for some reason, there was some kind of a greater interest in a particular grade and you locked one one kid out that you didn't have to.
Yeah, so we don't want to put that kind of constraint on you, but you don't anticipate with the 40 limit that would cause any issues right now.
I don't think so. Steve, do you think?
I agree. Yeah, I don't think so.
Okay. Thank you.
Or Joanne, do you mean over 40? Is that what you meant? I'm sorry.
No, I'm thinking or really any limit or over 40. I mean, what if you have 20 kids in the 9th grade? What does that do to a budget?
Oh, okay.
We don't have the danger of that now because it looks like the upper grades, but tell me about that. Do we?
Well, we'll only have 12 openings next year, as far as we can predict. So I don't know if we would have that situation. I think we could manage. It's not like those are drastically big numbers. Our school is big enough that we can absorb. If it was 10, if it was 20, 20 freshmen, I think we could manage that. But I think that's a good point. But I think we're too big to have that worry with just 40 kids total.
Thank you.
Thank you. Matt?
Hi. I'm interested in advocating for pushing the limit on this number to a number that the school can absorb. And I think this was part of the discussion last year of why we're limiting students inbound into that want to attend our high school with an arbitrary number. In terms of it's an arbitrary number set by the state, and we're just using that number. That's not necessarily reflective of what our school could absorb from that inbound population. And so I'd like to push for potentially no waiting list.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Then Anne?
Thanks. Had 3 questions. What is the deadline for students to transfer in? Does it have to be at, day 1 of school? Do we know the breakdown of waiting list students by grade right now? Just curious. And then the limits per grade or the constraints, would that be dictated by class size? So if you have a preference for a 22 kid class size for 10th graders, and you had 10 kids that wanted to come in waiting list or applied for 10th that were 10th graders, I would assume that would be dictated by the class size. It could change budget by if you had enough to make another classroom section. Would that be a possibility? Does that happen? I was just wondering about how that works a little bit. Thank you.
Steve, do you want to speak to that, or you want me to, or?
Yep. If you want to start, and I'll chime in.
Okay, I got to remember all your questions, Ann. I think on the second page where we have Steve's numbers, that's the breakdown on the different grades that we have right now currently. Do you have that second page?
Yeah, I'm looking at that, but I was wondering about the wait list.
Yeah, the wait list.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I have that. Yeah, I have that I don't have their grade levels on the wait list. I just have them listed by name on what I have. So I'm not 100% certain on their grade levels. And just so you know, that wait list is just for the rest of this year. So when this year ends, they receive no priority moving forward. If we don't get to a particular student who's on the wait list and they're still interested in attending Rutland High School next year, they would have to reapply, and then the process starts over in terms of the wait list.
And did you ask about the deadline, I think? The deadline for application?
No, I'm not that concerned about that, but the limits per grade we were talking about as a possibility or not. If we had, a classroom size that just couldn't hold any more kids, that would preclude.
These decisions are made. Kids who are accepted long before class sizes are determined. So we don't know. These decisions will be made by the middle of March, and we're probably not even getting into class size at that point.
I guess I would add I think based on experience watching how this has progressed through the years, I don't think that was an issue for us given the size of the school, because the school is big enough. We can absorb that many kids and it wouldn't make a huge difference in class size.
Y'all said, Ann? Okay. Hurley?
I'm concerned by not setting a limit for two reasons. Number one, budgets are going to be extremely tough all over the state of Vermont this year. And I don't want to get into a position of having to define what we reasonably can handle. My second concern about defining it that way is that if we start cutting people off after we define what we could handle, then we cut somebody off, we're opening ourselves up with a suit because there's no clear cut that we only take 40 or 50 kids. The problem is the way by doing that, it's very arbitrary and it's going to open us, I believe, up to a legal issue. So if we're going to go to a higher limit, I'd rather talk about a higher limit than having to discuss what we can handle, because I don't believe that would be legally in our best interest.
Good point.
Thank you, Hurley. Charlene?
My concern on that as well, I'm not in favor of increasing the amount, only because we, like Hurley was saying, we are already trying to budget this coming year with what we have resources, and also adding extra people. They also, some of them may have greater need than others, and we don't really know that at the moment. So it's hard to budget that extra cost as well, in case they need some added support. So that it does put another burden on the budget. So that's all I have to say.
Matt?
Is my understanding correct that any special education costs that come with an inbound student are borne by the sending district?
Yes.
That's right. If you look at the bottom of the first page, there's that second to last paragraph talks about who bears the cost. And
so that's not really an issue.
Right. So we're not receiving any money in tuition from anybody that comes into the building. If there are special education costs, for instance, that is paid by the sending town.
Right. So that's why I wanted to say that's not really an issue of having to worry about unanticipated costs for students with a special need, because the sending school district bears that cost, not our school district.
Right. I see Pam jumping, lighting up. I don't know if she has anything to say.
It's becoming available if needed.
Thanks, Pam. Hurley?
I agree with special ed, but I question tier 1, tier 2. If they're not identified, are we bearing those costs? Are we, Pam? That's a Pam question.
Yes. So the only
we are
cost that are
bearing the
reimbursed
cost
is
of tier 1, tier 2. Okay.
Correct. And there are many students with needs that are not eligible for special education.
That we have to bear that cost for.
We would, yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Joanne?
So Bill and Steve, you guys are proposing the 40. Is that what you're comfortable with right now under the circumstances?
I think it works. Yeah.
I am. Yeah.
And so you would be uncomfortable if we increased it to like 48 or something like that in this current year?
Personally, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Can I also add, not to cut you off, Joanne, but when this first came into law, I don't know how many years ago now, it was kind of developed in a series of 2 years. The first year was to get it up and going. And then the second year, as I recall it, the commitment from the legislature was to consider or look into or have some discussions about money following the kids. And that was a very brief discussion, I believe, and I don't think it got very far. So to me, I think there would be some value in the legislature revisiting that conversation. And I think it might make sense for that encouragement to come from the board, particularly from a district such as us, who's receiving a good number of incoming students. So I'll throw that out for consideration.
Yeah, so that's something we need to do. We need to also push the weighting study. So we have some politicking to do. I have been in the past in favor of having, last year I was in favor of more opportunities for students. And I also think in the long run, I think it's better for our sports. And I think it's, as these other schools get smaller, they really should just join us anyway. But there, I've said it to the public. However, I think in this time of uncertainty, I just think we should stick with the 40. That's my opinion. I think, especially it's what the administration is comfortable with. I do see your point, Matthew.
Any other discussion? Okay, so the motion on the floor is to set our inbound school choice limit at 40 students. So all those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. And any opposed? Okay, so the motion carries unanimously. Thank you. I got to flip through my papers again here. Sorry. All right. So next up is the central office reports. So I will turn it over to Superintendent Olson.
Thanks, Joanne. I'll try to be quick with Superintendent's report. And I just want to update the board on some of the learning settings that we had this week and how we're going to position ourselves for the rest of the week. As you know, I communicated with you through email that we had a COVID case that was related to busing. And we had some complicated contact tracing that went on, and we actually had to have some staff and students quarantine as a result. So we're always working with the Vermont Department of Health on this, and we really try to take a conservative approach to make sure we're prioritizing safety and health. But with that said, it took us a while to get through that process. Especially we heard about the story early evening on Sunday. So we had to go to remote learning on Monday. And then we still went through that process and necessitated some of our schools being in remote learning on Tuesday. We're going to be back in action on tomorrow, Wednesday. We think we've got everything resolved. And so the only issue with that, we had to reconfigure our busing and how we're going to do that for the remainder of the week. And the busing is limited. So I wanted to thank, in particular, the teachers, the drivers, the administrators, and behind the scenes in the maintenance office, Michael Daravianic and Margaret Clifford, who went through a lot of hours trying to figure this all out over the last 3 days. And to make sure that we're trying to get students back to in-person learning. And this happens all the time. I really want to thank the nurses and Justine Franco, our COVID coordinator, the nurse at the high school. These folks are working ever since we had a case. I think our first case was November 17th, and we've had people working on these issues every weekend since then, and through the vacations as well. So they've been really dedicated to make sure that we have kids in the buildings. And I want to thank the families and the students for being patient with us and flexible. And we have to remember what happens in the buildings is really a reflection of the community. So we're asking people to remain disciplined and remain vigilant. Speaking of COVID and coronavirus topics, the next step in the state's response to the pandemic is they're asking us to think about how do we recover. And what they mean by that is how do we address any learning losses that some students might have experienced through the pandemic. So you'll be hearing about that over the next few months. There's federal money that's going to be coming the way of Vermont, and that kind of money would be used to help pay for interventions like tutoring, trying to help kids get back up to speed. And the state expects us to draw up a plan for this and how we're going to do this. So as a leadership group in the district, we've been beginning to think about how are we going to make sure that if we had kids who face losses, how do we help them gain back? I'll remind parents that this coming Monday, the 18th, school is closed in celebration of Martin Luther King Day. And then on Friday, the 5th, there'll be no classes. We have another professional development day with our staff. The last one that we had was December 11th, and we had a really good day for paras and teachers. That was all planned out by Rob Bliss, Pam Reed, Patricia Eigner, and some other teachers who volunteered to teach some opportunities to our own staff. So we had a really good in-house learning day. And so we have another one on the 5th. Updating the board that we have continued our search for Director of Buildings and Grounds. Rob has led the team through some interviews yesterday. So again, I want to thank Hurley Kavakis and Aaron Schimpf for being involved in that. We hope we have some candidates that will pan out, and they're looking good. And finally, a reminder for the board, we have I don't want to call it a graduation ceremony, but we have a ceremony in mid-year with our Grove Street students, and we celebrate their meeting graduation requirements. They still can come to graduation at the end of the school year, but we have this ceremony mid-year because they've met requirements, and then they might be off to the working world, or they might go on to take some college courses at that point. So that is going to be Friday, January 22nd. Usually we have an in-person ceremony, and it's a really, really nice, personal, small setting. I don't know if we can do that this year. We're going to do something a little different, just like this year is very different all around. So you'll get some more information about that. I understand it's going to be televised in some way, or maybe through this format. And so you'll be able to see that if you're interested. So I want to congratulate those students who've finished their journey, and the families and the educators who helped them along the way. So that's it for me. Thank you, Allison.
Sure. Thank you. So the next up then is the FY22 budget. So I don't know if you want to lead that in, Bill, or.
Yeah, Ted has a presentation, and I think, Ted, are you putting that on there, or is Rob putting it up? Oops, Ted's muted.
He's working on it, or I can help him. He's going to do it.
He's got it. I'll let Ted go. Sorry, I don't want to overstep what he's going to say.
If you'd like to, Bill, why don't you go ahead for a moment? I can wait.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Ted, that we went through this with the board in December. Ted has been waiting for numbers to come in from the state, and they are coming bit by bit. The state, I think, is a little bit behind in putting all their numbers together for us to make our calculations. But Ted has a pretty good sense of where we are based on what we presented in December. So this would be like that final presentation.
Okay, thank you very much, Bill. Thank you very much, commissioners. I appreciate your time this evening. And I want to express particular thanks to the Finance Committee, Joanne and her team, who've been working very closely with us for the last few months and provided very helpful guidance. As everybody has talked about, this promises to be a challenging year. We think we have the beginnings of a solid plan forward, but we'll look forward to reviewing that with you further this evening. So on my next slide, and I hope everybody can see the screen, I have three objectives with you tonight. The first is to review the budget in a bit more detail than we did at the Finance Committee meeting in early December. As you'll see, the messages and the numbers have not changed significantly. There's been some refinement, but we do want to offer you a bit more detail tonight than we were able to get into during that early December overview. In the process, we'd like to highlight some of the cost drivers for you, some of the savings that we see and have already incorporated, as well as the outlook for grants and revenues. We also will talk about uncertainties and their possible impacts on the fiscal 22 budget. Requested actions would be to ask the board either to approve the budget as proposed or recommend revisions. Ultimately, we also need to request board approval of ballot language, which is standard with some updated numbers I'll show you momentarily. And the reason for those requested actions is, of course, we have a deliverable. The city clerk is asking that, as every year, we deliver ballot language in order for, in a timely basis, for that to be printed up and prepared. The due date this year is a week from tonight on January 19th. Before I go on to the next slide, does anybody have any questions or comments about the plan for that overview? Okay, and please feel free to jump in at any time. Please stop me if I'm going too quickly. I want to be respectful of your time, but I'm very happy to answer questions and take comments as we go along. So this slide outlines some key messages. On the top line, our proposed expenses for the district of $58 million would be almost $1 million lower than the current year's budget. We have been looking for and have found efficiencies and are achieving lower costs in several areas, including our special education programs next year. And these efficiencies and lower costs more than offset higher costs anticipated for salaries, benefits, and some COVID-related changes in our protocols. It's very important to point out, as far as special education is concerned, that Pam, our director of those programs, is responsible for stewarding and ensuring that the district provides all required services for these students. And it's the decrease that we're seeing and anticipating is a function of a couple of things. One, in any given year, the cost and the programs reflect the mix of students and their needs at the time. And also, Pam and other members of the team had been working on bringing in-house a number of services that can be provided probably better and at some lower cost. So those are some beneficial trends that have been underway and we're going to see realized in fiscal 22. Unfortunately, our revenues for the district are also projected to decline in the coming year. We will benefit from COVID-related funding, some of which is going to be applied to this current fiscal year. We're anticipating that there'll be additional COVID-related funding for the coming fiscal year, and this has already been mentioned by the Agency of Education. What the basic message here is, and we'll get into the detail, is the district's average cost per pupil to be funded by the state in the coming year would increase by about 6% to just under $17,000. That remains below the Vermont average of about $17,600. Our district has typically been 95, 90% or in that range of the Vermont average. We're getting a little closer to the average this year on this budget basis, but still below. The estimated cost per pupil, however, these numbers that I'm quoting, is likely to be updated in January after further information is released by the AOE, as Bill mentioned. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that on the next slide, unless anyone has questions about these key messages. Okay, let's move on then. On a lighter note, I'd like to reference a quotation that's been used by Yogi Berra and many other people with a wit that's better than mine, and it points out that making predictions is difficult, especially about the future. And there's a lot of wisdom there, and it really applies to this year in particular. Back in December, some of you may know that the Vermont Commissioner of Taxes wrote a letter to the Speaker of the House, Representative Johnson, about possible impacts to the budget and taxation this year. And I would just like to read two of the sentences that he included in that letter, because I think it describes what our district and all other districts are facing this year. So Mr. Bolio wrote, "There are always variables, concerns, and opportunities that lead to uncertainty in the forecast. These uncertainties are significantly amplified this year, and Governor Scott and the administration are committed to mitigating the impact of these uncertainties on property taxpayers to the greatest extent possible." For those of you who read the letter, you know that they reference the fact that a number of factors are provided and published based upon statutory calculations. And those are numbers we've received and begun to incorporate. But some of these factors are driving a number of districts, all districts whose business managers I've spoken with, to be looking at higher taxes because of the system. So there has been discussion, and I've participated in some of these, about looking at freezing several factors. So for example, the Agency of Education has already agreed to freeze or hold harmless enrollment counts for the fiscal 22 budget. That's oftentimes referred to as ADM for the average daily membership. The interesting point there is apparently statewide, homeschooling has increased from 2,000 last year to 5,000 this year, COVID related. And the agency officials are concerned about the potential impacts of drops in class enrollment to the funding. So if your enrollment is going down in fiscal 22, it will be held at the 21 level. If your enrollment is going up in 22, you'll get the benefit of that higher number. There's also been discussion at the state level about freezing factors that drive the calculation of homestead tax rates, including the common level of appraisal, or CLA, and the property tax yield, or oftentimes referred to as yield. Both of these factors are tending to increase tax rates irrespective of any changes in relative expenses or revenues. And so again, the state folks are looking at possibly holding those changes in abeyance for a year. As many of you know, if findings from the UVM weighting study are implemented in coming years, then districts such as ours could receive added funding based upon those weighting recommendations to change factors that are basically 30 years old. But I do point out, I say in coming years, because those with whom I've spoken have said that with everything that's going on, COVID related and otherwise this year, the legislature is not likely to take this up. Of course, anything can happen, but it's probably in the next couple of years that we're looking at that implementation. Our district is in the process of ongoing negotiations of all 4 union contracts this year. We anticipate that could have a material impact on the district's F22 budget, just depending upon the outcome of those negotiations, some of which are still early on and really not possible to predict. So currently, there's a very wide range of possible outcomes for the district's homestead property tax rate. And I just wanted to highlight that going in up front. With that said, I would just like to show you the next slide, which is the standard ballot language. And this is statutory requirement. We're not allowed to change anything in this except for 3 numbers on an annual basis. The first number is in the second line, which refers to the amount of total expenses that are being requested. The second number is in, I think that's line 6, which refers to the calculated spending per equalized pupil. And the in line 7 is the estimated percentage increase year over year. So these are numbers that we're going to get into, but at some point, of course, the board will be requested to approve such ballot language. Let me show you now some of the details behind that on the next chart. So I know there are a lot of numbers on this page, and I apologize for that, but they really all relate to each other. So I wanted to put them in one place for you. And so what this is going to show is how revenues, expenses, and cost per pupil relate. I've shown you in the first column the fiscal 21 approved budget that we're using this year. I've shown you the proposed budget for this coming year, fiscal 22, and then changes on a dollar and a percentage basis. So that top line obviously is very important, and that is the total all-in expenses anticipated for the district. And then you'll see there, we're expecting that to decline by a little more than $800,000 year to year. The next line shows you revenues that are anticipated from federal grants, such as title grants and local sources. That excludes funding from the state. The difference between these lines, which is the third line, is what's remaining to be funded, And the state of Vermont, of course, guarantees that that funding will be provided. What's really interesting here is you can see that our expenses are down by almost $1 million, but unfortunately, we're anticipating that revenues year to year will decline by more than that, almost $3 million. So, of course, with revenues declining faster than expenses are declining, and you can see the percentages over on the far right, the amount to be funded by the state increases year to year from 32.2 million to 34.3 million, or an increase of about 6%. It's actually a little bit under 6.5% at $2 million. Why is that important? Well, of course, from the state standpoint, that's very important. And from the district standpoint, it is this net amount, the amount to be funded by the state, that is used when calculating the cost per pupil. So a lot of people think it's the total cost per pupil. That's not correct. It's the amount funded by the state. And of course, that's all Vermont really cares about. So again, you can have this unusual situation, and I'll explain the revenue picture in a few moments, where, hey, our expenses actually are going down, but our average cost per pupil and the amount to be funded by the state is actually going up. I've shown in the middle of the chart average daily membership. We talked about that a little earlier. And before I go on, let me highlight for you, you see blue asterisks, and you see hopefully some numbers in blue. And the reason that these numbers are in blue is because those are numbers that are still pending official results to be released by the Agency of Education. And I was on a call last Friday in which we were told, and in fact, we had received some earlier notice, that these ADM numbers will not be finalized anytime before January 22. The state has had some data management problems and data collection issues. Many districts have ADMs that don't look right, and so they've reopened the submission period. It was reopened yesterday, and it goes through the 22nd. Well, since ADM is one of the factors driving equalized pupils, we don't know yet what that number is going to be, and therefore we don't know exactly the final equalized pupil. And if you don't know the equalized pupil, it's a bit hard to calculate your average cost per pupil. So we think these numbers are probably going to be in the ballpark, but I guarantee you they will change. What's interesting about ADM is typically in the past, the state has had a due date of December 1st when they have released these numbers, but that hasn't happened for the last 3 years because of data problems. So it is what it is, and we will stay on top of this. Our district and our district registrar believe that the numbers we've submitted are fairly close to what the state's going to issue, but the state does massage them and look at them, and they're not official until the state says okay. Now, in this case, the ADM numbers that we had show a slight decline from 21 to 22, the 22 number being based on the fall count that was done a few months ago. And you'll see that, well, that looks like that's going to decline. Well, in this case, if that occurs, the district will be held harmless. Our number will be frozen at the 1840 from 21. So that would help a little bit. And on that basis, I have assumed for the time being that on the next line, the equalized pupils will remain flat year to year. Now, you will notice that the equalized pupils are more than the average daily membership, about 10% more. And the reason for that is various weighting factors are applied to adjust for an equivalent or standard pupil. So, for example, if based upon the metrics that the state uses, somebody is considered to require more intensive educational services, then that student might be equated as 1.2 pupils in order to try and standardize across needs. The logic is sound in terms of how well that's applied. I'm still learning, but obviously it's a very complicated calculation. But based on the numbers that we have, as you can see in the remainder of the chart, when you take the state-funded cost of $34.3 million that we're anticipating, and you divide by 2,024.5 equalized pupils, the best number we have at this time, you end up with an estimated cost per pupil for the city of Rutland of just under $17,000, which, as I mentioned, is about 96% of what Vermont is estimating as its average cost per pupil. Now, I've thrown a lot of concepts and numbers at you all at once, and I apologize for that, but I hope I've gone at a pace that makes it reasonably clear. But let me stop and ask if people have questions or would like me to try and explain a little bit more clearly than I have to this point.
Sure. If anyone has a question, just wants to speak up, because I can't see everyone. So go for it.
Ed, this is Charlene.
Hi, Charlene.
Can you tell me if there's a change in the average daily membership, is that going to change the language that we have that we're voting on for the ballot?
Is that going to change the language on the ballot? Is that what you asked?
For that we're going to vote in, I guess. The percentages on there.
That's a really good question, and I appreciate your asking that. And so as I answer you, I'm just going to make sure I look at the language, and because I want to make sure I answer you correctly. So the language excluding the numbers will not change. It is possible that the numbers could change. The interesting thing that I've been thinking about before this meeting is if the language in the resolution in the ballot says $57,981,000, well, we're asking you to approve that level of expenditure. That will not change. It's possible if we get some different numbers back on the ADM and on the equalized pupils, that average number could change. Will it change by a material amount? I'm not sure, and I don't think so, but I won't know for sure until sometime after January 22nd. One thing that I've thought about doing was potentially rounding the number instead of showing you something exact, maybe suggesting that the board consider just putting in a flat $17,000 just to keep it even, in the hope that anything that we would spend would be below that. So in a sense, it would be a conservative assumption. That would still be in the 6 or 6.5% range. So there's probably a way to accommodate that. I was on the phone today with Harry Heck, the city clerk, and I'm comparing notes with some of my business managers. But Charlene, that's the best answer I can give you at this time.
That's great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ted?
Yes, Hurley. Hi.
Hi. Do we know what the average has been, what other school districts are looking at for an average increase in per pupil spending?
Well, I've heard a couple of people speculate, but they are facing the same sorts of uncertainty as we are, and I would be reluctant to just give one or two anecdotal examples. The one thing that I would point to, Hurley, is that the state itself overall is anticipating about a 3 3/4% increase, as you can see. But of course, they're at a higher level. And I don't want to say that the city of Rutland is catching up, but we have been below. We have had some additional needs, which we have met. So I look at our additional percentage increase as, potentially closing some of, the difference, because maybe we're doing some things that needed to be done. I mean, I really don't know enough to comment on that other than to observe the trend. I do know that in my conversations with my peers in the last week or so, everybody is quite anxious over, what's happening in terms of the potential impact on tax rates, because a lot of that, frankly, and as you can hopefully see from some of the charts and we can get into further, is actually beyond the control of the district, which is why the people at the state level are talking about, and that's why I read you that quote from the tax commissioner. They're talking about, okay, we've given you these numbers. We are required by law to calculate those numbers and factors based upon statutory descriptions. So we fulfilled that obligation. Now that that's done, we feel that we're going to have to take some additional steps to mitigate these impacts. And that's why they're talking about freezing. So if you would like, I know some of my colleagues, they're pretty much in the same timing right now. I mean, I could make a couple of calls and see what they're saying. I would be surprised if our spending increase. It's interesting. Many districts actually are looking at more expenses on that top line, Hurley. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know of any other districts that I've spoken to who've said they're actually declining. I spoke with one district that is keeping it flat. So Rutland City is actually, in that respect, doing better than other districts. We happen to be impacted by a decrease in revenues, which I'll talk about shortly, which is something that we're trying to remedy. But that is how the numbers are playing out. I mean, we basically, the main reason for that decline in revenue, and I'm sorry that you didn't have a chance to attend the early December Finance Committee meeting, but I'll attempt in a shorter time span to mention that to you. So in fiscal 21, for that budget, the decision was made by the administration to return to shareholders several $1 million of working capital that had been accumulated over the years because the district year to year tended to run some modest surpluses, which accumulated over time. That's taxpayer money. So the decision was made that rather than continuing to hold on to that, basically several $1 million were recognized in revenue and returned to the taxpayer. We do not have the luxury of doing the same thing to the same extent for this coming year's budget because the majority of what was remaining in that accumulated working capital surplus was used. So we're in a process of transition now, and that's one of the reasons when we recognize this, well, not we, when I was able to understand that back in August, early in my tenure, and brought this to the attention of the leadership here, our discussion was, okay, we're going to need to get started early to try and find efficiency steps that we can take that will ensure the continuity and the sustainability of the academic programs and their excellence, but while also making as best efforts as possible to find efficiencies and cost savings because we could see what was coming down the track. I hope that helps explain things a little bit.
It does, Ted. I'm just so you know, I probably will be voting down this number. I did have sent a message to Joanne. I could not make it what I thought should be a reasonable number. I just think it's not just us, but it's everywhere that we're putting the burden on so much of the taxpayers. And I think we really need to get to the point where we need to start looking at other efficiencies that we might have to do. And it's not that I'm anti-school, because anybody knows me, I am not. But it's to the point where the unemployment rate is so high, we're going into a vote of city and, well, statewide. I mean, we're all going into it. And I just think that we could be looking at other efficiencies. But again, thank you for all your work.
You're very welcome. And, I believe that many members of the administration would be glad to talk further about, we have already included, the one thing I forgot to mention, Hurley, is one of the charts that I included in the December presentation highlighted the fact that this current budget that we're proposing here tonight again already includes $600,000 of efficiencies that we had found. Some of that includes staff reductions, both full-time and part-time positions. Some of it is in the facilities area. And keep in mind that, these expenses that we're showing with that $800,000 plus reduction, we are also absorbing additional costs and more than offsetting them that are COVID related. So for example, Michael, our Director of Buildings and Facilities, in his budget for this year, anticipated a several $100,000 increase in simply the cost of air filters, upgrading to a higher quality filter to help protect against COVID. changing them quarterly instead of semi-annually. So these are some of the COVID-related costs that, that we're incurring. That appears in the expense line, okay, because it is an expense. Now, also, there are revenues to help offset some of that, and that appears in that line. And just to give you an example of things that are, it's so much in flux, but things that are changing. So originally, Efficiency Vermont told us that we could not apply for a grant for those higher cost filters. Then, fortunately, in December, we were following up with them and we learned they changed their mind. I don't know why, but suddenly the MERV 13 filters qualified for funding and the district is receiving more than $20,000 to help compensate for those costs. That'll be in the revenues for 21. But, just an example of, the flux that we are in. And I understand what you're saying, but I can tell you from a fiduciary standpoint, I've been working with Bill and Rob and Pam and others since late August, basically, when I brought this forward to start discussing with them to try and find as many efficiencies as possible while being as least disruptive as possible, because, I know, of course, you're very pro-education, but it is really important to think about as we look around for efficiencies, what would potentially compromise the educational mission and organization. We're looking for a director of buildings right now, as you know, and we appreciate your role, by the way, in that search committee. And as you know, it is costly to recruit good people with the experience that we need. And so, you don't want to lose people on a short-term basis that you would need to have to bring back potentially. There's so many complex factors, but I'll leave it at that. And I'll just say that if you or anybody else wish to discuss in more detail outside of this forum, some of the things that we've been looking at, I'll be more than glad to cover that with you.
Thank you, Ted.
You're very welcome, sir. Are there any other comments or questions about page 6? And I really appreciate this discussion because a lot of this right here is the heart of what we're talking about tonight.
I just have a comment, or maybe it will turn into a question. We're talking about efficiencies and kind of slimming down as much as possible, which I think being part of the finance committee, we've talked about this a lot and worked through different levels of what it looks like at this point, what it may look like at another point. I want to just share another perspective, and Ted, please, as always, you are my corrector if it's off. That when we look at cuts or making efficiencies in a community now that's will try to recover soon. We're not in recovery yet. We're still in crisis. The further we go down that road, we are also contributing to people being unemployed, to money that can go into the economic recovery of our community. So there has been a lot of effort to make this budget as slender and as efficient as possible. I think maybe a discussion of the implication of this not moving forward, of what that may mean to our community, may be a useful situation down the road, as there will be, we can all kind of foresee that there will be more loss of positions and more loss of people maintaining their jobs and being able to not be on unemployment and things like that as we try to recover as a community. So it's a little bit of the flip side of things. If that's relevant in any way, does that have an impact in any way? Not
Absolutely.
Sure, but something to think about.
In fact, Dina, not only are you spot on, but I really appreciate your highlighting. It's always important to look with a 360-degree perspective and to, as you say, look at the flip side or other aspects of an issue. And just to pick up on what you said at the moment, which is such an important point for the board to consider, I've just flipped ahead to page 10, and then we can go back. And this refers to what you may have read about in the frequently asked questions in the past, and some of us have talked about, and it's what we refer to as the 25 cent on the dollar rule of thumb. And basically, the message of this is on the bottom line, but I'll go to the bottom line and come back up again. If locally paid taxes are, if we reduce $1 of district expense, that reduces locally paid taxes by an average of 25 cents. So think about that for a minute. Now, the reason for that is because about 25% of school district expenses are funded by local taxpayers. To be specific, in fiscal year 21, and these numbers are right out of the cash flow report from the city of Rutland, the taxes paid by Rutland City taxpayers, including homestead, as well as the commercial and non-homestead, totaled $14 million. And you can see the breakdown right there. So homeowners paid $5 million toward the district educational expenses of almost $59 million. I mean, you can look at that right there and say that's less than 10%. If you use that comparison, then to Dina's point, you know, you're really, if you cut $1 of expense from the top line, the homeowners are only going to realize a 10-cent benefit on that, because most of the funding for Rutland comes in from the state and from the federal government. Now, I would never advocate keep dollars on the top line of expense if they're not needed, but there is a cost to doing some of these cuts. Of course, we would, if you look at the flip side of this now, so you see toward the bottom there, so Rutland receives an average of 75 cents on the dollar from state and federal sources. I mean, so the district has 75 cents per dollar coming in from outside sources, which, by the way, generates, as Dina was describing in reference to employment and spending and additional taxes on that employment, income, and spending, a multiplier effect. Because I'm a finance geek and I like the Federal Reserve and all that kind of stuff that bore most people to tears, I've read publications by the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis and others who estimate that multiplier effect in many communities is 2.5, which means that for every dollar of income in a community, if most of that dollar is spent locally, rent, food, utilities, other things, that tends to generate another $2.50 incrementally to the benefit of the local economy. Or to put it another way, if you take $1 out, you're going to lose $2.50 of local economy benefit. So that's, again, not an argument to say don't trim your costs and keep them as responsible as you can, but you don't want to have an unintended consequence, as Dina was describing, of inadvertently doing more harm than you do good. I mean, actually, this district is a beneficiary of very significant and generous grant programs from both the state and the Fed. So I leave you with that thought. And of course, there are different opinions on that, but I just wanted to offer you my perspective. And with that, we'll come back to it. But let me jump back now to where we were in the presentation. I think we finished with this recap. So let me just jump to the next slide, which is a very, very important slide. And you'll be glad to see it has fewer numbers on it. But as some of you know, salaries and benefits constitute 80% of the district's total expenditures. So, you know, of the $59 million that are in this budget for fiscal year 21, you can see almost 46.5 are related to salaries and benefits for full-time and part-time people. So total compensation is what we refer to as $46.5 million. And frankly, you know, I'm going to say, I think this result that's being shown here is remarkable. And I'm not, and I'm going to say that again. I think this is remarkable because with some of the planned efficiencies in reducing the number of full-time positions, with doing what we can to manage salary expenses. As we've got it in the budget right now, our salary costs would decline year to year from the fiscal 21 budget by $750,000. Now, we don't control to a great extent the benefits. Salaries, of course, the more your salary goes up, the more our contributions to retirement and pension costs go up. That's a function of income. The more our workers' comp and life insurance goes up, that tends to be a function of income. But about half of these benefits or more are medically plan related, and that is not a function of salary. That goes up with medical costs. And you'll recall, I am sure, in Mary Alma's presentation last year, that the year before, medical costs were going up by 12%. This year, they're going up by an average of 10%. There are 4 medical plans that the state of Vermont offers to employees. For 3 out of the 4 plans, the premium costs are going up by 8%. For one of them, they're going up by 18%. These plans are not determined by the city. We do not have a choice. All employees have the option to sign up for whichever plan they want, and the district is required to pay the employer share. So when you average the benefit costs in, those are increasing by about 5.5%, because of course not all these benefit costs are going up by the same amount as the medical insurance. So when we were working through these numbers, frankly, I was astounded that when we looked at the total compensation line, it's basically flat from budget to budget, basically because of the efficiencies, not only on the full-time employees, but the efficiencies that we built into this forecast include reductions in a number of part-time positions, aides and such like that, which are more people, but they're portions of full-time people. And Bill and the team have spoken to these people during the fall. It's a very difficult step to take and a very hard decisions to make. But again, we have to balance the general interests of the community, the financial sustainability of the school district, and our educational programs. And Bill, at this point, do you want to say anything more about the letter and the communications that you had to employees in the last few months about this, or do you not want to add anything further?
Well, I think we went through that process, and these are all people and these are all jobs, and like you said, Ted, in Dina, there's a benefit to the greater economy for having people employed, but we do owe our responsibilities to being fiscally responsible, and we think we've come in at a budget where we are not cutting deeply into the bone of what we offer our students and the many needs of our families. And going beyond this would do just that for the benefit of, as Ted was saying, of 25 cents back to us for every dollar that we cut.
Thanks, Bill. Let me move on. So look at that line, total compensation, because that's going to be the start of the next chart, which shows you a more detailed breakdown of expenses. And again, we're looking at the approved 21 budget, followed by the proposed 22 budget. And so just to keep this chart a little more simple, since we've talked about compensation, I've shown a bit more than half a dozen of the major categories. The first couple of lines for program or direct instructional costs and special education do exclude the salaries and benefits for the teachers and instructors involved in these programs. Those are included in the compensation line that we've already reviewed. And of course, you can see several other major categories that I'm sure you're very familiar with. What's the main message from this chart? If you look at the dollar change column, second from the right, there is only one number that goes up. And that's in the middle of the chart for food service, and that increases by only 1%. For the last several months, as we've been working with principals and administrators and others on our team, the message has been consistently flat to down. And we are looking to decrease wherever we can in order to save expenditures for the higher value add activities. The reason why food service is projected to go up about 1% is because while per those ADM counts I showed you, which of course are tentative on page 6, the enrollment would decline by about 1.5% if those numbers hold. Anticipated CPI cost for food inflation is 2.5%. So as always with expenses, we net, amount of activity, in this case declining with higher unit costs. We work with Fresh Picks, our vendor, very closely to ensure that we provide the required nutritional delivery, but at the most efficient possible cost. And we have a consultant who works for us who had been with the state and is very, very knowledgeable. We're very fortunate that she works it as closely as she does to optimize the dollars. But you can see that in most cases, again, the special ed we spoke to a few minutes ago, Pam, of course, can speak in more detail to that. One line you'll see in terms of financing, scheduled to drop a bit by about $38,000. That actually, based on our current schedules, would go up from $1,289,000 in this budget to more than $1.3 million next year, just based upon the debt schedules. But I was looking at our debt schedules and our balance sheet, and the district has some debt on its books that is currently at a rate of about 4.33%. That's held by Capital One. And we reached out to them and asked if they could refinance that and give us a bit better deal based upon current rates. This debt's several years old. And actually, the leases they don't reopen for negotiation until next year, but they're talking with us about possibly renegotiating and giving us the lower rate now. So I've included efficiencies like that. That's a savings of about $50,000 or more because it would have gone up. Utilities, I should speak to IT. Our director of IT has offered up, I think it's about $25,000 or $30,000 of potential savings there. That would represent the deferment of replacing IT hardware that, like our buildings, is on a schedule for replacement, given the essential role that IT always plays, and now especially so with remote learning. My recommendation would be that we don't try and save $25,000 or $30,000 there, that we replace the equipment on time to maintain the integrity of our operations there, because if IT goes down, remote learning goes down, and that's not something anybody wants to see. So, but that is an area that we have explored. Utilities, I am hoping that we can see a little bit of a reduction because we have, the newly installed solar panels that went live this summer and ostensibly will begin delivering us some savings. So, if we can find $50,000 here, $40,000 there, we have been looking for where we can do the least harm to the district. So that's how we get to about $800,000 of anticipated savings in our total costs year over year. Let me stop there and ask if anybody has questions about any of these items or would like to offer any comments.
Ted, this is Charlene.
Hi, Charlene.
Can you hear me? So what I'd like to say, or the least to have it known, I mean, as a member of the Finance Committee as well, Medina and others, and having multiple discussions with you, Ted, presenting the figures and all the work that you've done. And I think I've mentioned this before, but I feel like I'm satisfied that you have exerted your fiduciary responsibility to, present the best fiscally responsible budget that we can by maintaining, it's easy when a budget comes to look at the expenses. Everybody first thinks budget, where can we cut? Where can we cut? You're looking at the expenses. Sometimes it's not all in the expense. And I know that you're, thinking of ways to maybe increase the revenue too, but, I'm sure everyone wants to maintain the integrity.
Oh, you just went out.
You just have to unmute, Charlene.
Thank you, Charlene. Yeah, you went mute by accident.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
So yeah, everybody wants to maintain the integrity of the academic programs, and again, like Dina mentioned, we don't want to lose employment. We're talking about staff. So again, I feel like we have pared it down with the administration, trying to find the efficiencies. And again, this is all discussions that maybe we've had in the finance committee that people maybe not be aware of, but I do want them to understand that we've had these discussions in depth with you, Ted. You've done in-depth, detailed reports on this, so I appreciate that, and I feel that you have come to the table with the best version that we have here, without disrupting the integrity of the programs and staff, and and in the end, it's the kids that we're hoping that are going to hurt from the budget not going through.
I appreciate your saying that, Charlene, very, very much, and not so much because anybody's looking for a compliment, but just because we have really been very committed to trying to find whatever dollars we can to do no harm, because every dollar we can find, even if it's saving some dollars by lowering the interest rate on some financing early, if we can save those are dollars then that either we don't have to charge to the taxpayer or can be spent for the educational purpose that brings us here. But I'm glad you mentioned the revenues, because that's an area that I haven't yet talked about. We'll get to it in a moment. But in the area of tuitions, for example, we go through an exercise every year. We're completing it this week, where the state asks us, now this is of course aside from the choice program that you were discussing earlier, which doesn't bring the tuition dollars in, but the high school has about 165 students who come in from other towns who bring the tuition with them to the district's revenues. And I took, with the team here, we took a very close look. That's typically more than $2.5 million of revenue to the district. And so we took a very hard look at where are the district's costs that we're charging for the tuition relative to others, and then most importantly, relative to what the state will allow us to charge. And as some of you may know, and I have learned, the state has a mechanism in place where they will issue an allowable tuition, and then you are allowed to charge up to that plus or minus 3%. They give you a little bit of margin for error. The last official tuition that the state has released was for fiscal 19. So to estimate what we can charge for this year, you kind of have to project, extrapolate a little inflation for the next 3 years from 19 to 22. And then you try and hit within that range. And I will tell you, and I'm unabashed about this, I have targeted that tuition to be at about 2.8%, right under the 3% threshold, because any student who's coming into this district is getting a wonderful education with wonderful teachers at wonderful facilities. And I want those dollars for the benefit of our taxpayers. So hopefully we came in pretty close. We won't know for 3 years on the current schedule. What happens, by the way, is if you charge too much, then you have to refund the overcharge, and you don't charge enough, you do get to bill for it. But, that's an example of the revenue side. And what's really important to me about what you and Dina have said, and it's worth emphasizing for everybody who doesn't have the benefit of the Finance Committee discussions, is the most successful organizations that I have seen are organizations that manage effectively and in a balanced way through the cycle. What do I mean by that? Well, at ExxonMobil, for example, whose results are highly dependent upon crude oil prices, which nobody predicts and nobody can predict and nobody can control, there are invariable ups and downs in the cycles. And the approach at companies like that is to say we're going to manage through the cycles. So when things get really good, when oil prices hit $150 a barrel, you do not go out and start spending all that money, because it's going to come back down. And when things get really down, you don't cut to the bone, because eventually it's going to come back. So you try and manage evenly across that cycle for the success of the organization, the benefit of its constituents. So I can truly represent you. I'm bringing that philosophy here. because I do recognize that, we're in business here for the long term. And, frankly, if you want to just put it in financial terms, your real estate values are in part a function of the excellent educational organization that you have here. So many of my friends, maybe you folks as well, you move to a community and you'll pay more for a house because it's got a great educational system. That is a priceless asset that brings benefits also, of course, to the community in terms of developing our youth to eventually take our places. So apologize for that latter philosophy, but going through the cycle and not overreacting to one particular year. Our philosophy is we're trying to, as you know from being on the Finance Committee, we're trying to manage over the next several years, if not longer. Thank you for that, by the way.
Yeah, and I just feel like the Finance Committee, and I guess I'm speaking on behalf of maybe the Finance Committee, and somebody can pipe up if they don't agree, but I feel like we asked the tough questions. You came back with the explanations. We went there, and I feel like the Finance Committee was satisfied.
Thank you very much.
What you presented. So.
I would definitely agree with Charlene.
Same here.
I didn't want to speak for anybody, but.
No, thank you, Charlene. That was great. That was very well spoken, and thank you.
Another point that I wanted to, since we can't see everybody, and I'm jumping in as instructed by Allison, the point of Ted that we've talked about on and off in the committee and sometimes on the board is that, and to Charlene's point, as we kind of focus on expenses a lot, which is our intuitive tendencies, I think, when we look at budget, is that things like food service, for example, is grant-based revenue-ish, most of it, at least, I think. Yeah. So thinking about cutting stuff that are providing us with money in may not be the best way to look at cutting expenses. So when we see increases in things that are grant-based, we look at them differently than we would at something that's not grant-based.
Thank you for that point. That's really important.
I appreciated the discussions with you, Ted, and being on the Finance Committee. It's not my expertise, and I've gained a lot of knowledge. Not a lot for me. And what you've said with us during our meetings going along makes a lot of sense. It's tough decisions, and but unless you are, but I'm grateful to have been involved in these detailed conversations, because I think that's really one of the ways that you can get a good understanding of how this works. So thank you.
Thanks to all of you. The guidance of the Finance Committee I am so grateful that you created a Finance Committee. We've benefited significantly from it.
So has everybody spoken? Because I'd like to make a motion.
Okay, Joanne?
Okay, so let me find that language now. I'd like to make a motion that we pass the school budget for $57,981,000, and that we include the following proposed ballot language. Shall the voters of the Rutland City School District approve the school board to expend $57,981,000, which is the amount the school board determined to be necessary for the ensuing fiscal year. It is estimated that this proposed budget, if approved, will result in education spending of $16,956 per equalized pupil. This projected spending per equalized pupil is 6% higher than spending for the current year.
And is there a second?
Second.
Okay, Dina for the second.
Roll call vote, please.
Yep, absolutely. Any other discussion with the board? No. Seeing none. So we will go with a roll call vote. Brittany Kavakis,
No.
Hurley Kavakis,
No.
Ann Dages,
Yes.
Dina Goldberg,
Yes.
Matt Olenek. I'm sorry, Matt, I didn't hear. Okay.
Yes.
I was looking down, so I couldn't see if you did anything. Charlene Seward? Yes. Not working. Kathy Solsa
Yes.
and Joanne Pensack.
Yes.
Okay, so we have 6 yeses and 2 nos, so the motion passes. Thank you, Ted, for all your work on that, and the Finance Committee for all the time they spent in, all the long hours and work that was done on that. And of course, all the administration for coming up with a budget. So, all right, now let me get back to, so the next thing on our agenda is committee reports. And the first one up is staff relations. I don't know if Dina, if you have anything you want to report out in public session. I know negotiations are ongoing.
In the public session, I just that we're meeting, started meeting with all units, and we'll continue to meet ongoingly, probably throughout February, and then the rest will come in a little report in the executive session.
Great. Thank you, Dina. Thank you for all the work that you and the committee are doing. Another tireless round of meetings with the crazy times here. So the next committee report is Superintendent Evaluation Update from Joanne and Matt.
Yes. Am I on? Okay. So I briefly talked to Matt today, and I also spoke with Sherry. And the plan is to get, Bill has provided us with the goals, and the plan is to mail out the superintendent evaluations this week to everyone, and you will have self-addressed stamped envelopes to send them back to Sherry, and then she will give them to us unopened, and we'll tabulate them and try to present them, if not at the next meeting, at the March meeting, but we want to finish this in this cycle. So we're hoping that you will return them within a 2-week turnaround, if you could. So we're also going to do the same in terms of all the direct reports, the same as we did last time, Hurley. Allison, is it all right if Hurley was involved last time and he seems to have a question? Is it all right if I call on him?
No,
Sure.
I don't actually. I hit the button by mistake. I'm
Okay.
sorry. I moved into a different room.
So Hurley and I worked on this, and some other folks too were on the committee. I think Dina, and we're going to follow that same procedure that we developed the last time. And so that's the update. You'll be provided with Bill's goals. There'll be instructions. And like I said, it'd be good if we could finish this during this cycle, because we might have a new board after March. So it'll be important for us to evaluate the city current board, and of course, all of Bill's direct reports. So, the principals, Rob, the drill.
Yeah. Joanne, you were referencing Bill's self-evaluation, correct?
Yes, that will go out.
That needs to be sent out to, I think, the body at large.
His goals.
Yeah, the self-evaluation document
Yes.
that he shared earlier, that's what you're referencing?
Well, he also sent us out goals. I think he sent us 2 documents. Matt.
Yeah. Okay.
So the self-evaluation and goals.
Okay.
Right, Bill?
That's right. I have report cards too. If you want to, I'll send those. I'll send anything.
A+. So there you go. I have some bias here.
Okay, is that it, Joanne? Okay, so next up is old and new business. So we have Kathy has been attending the RCPS Equity Council meetings and had sent an email. I believe the whole board should have got their request around discussing the equity definitions. So I will turn it over to Kathy for that.
Well, I wonder if it makes sense to turn it over to Pam or Rob since they're heading up the committee.
I'm happy to help. I'm so glad, Kathy, that you got that on the agenda and that you did your homework from the work group to get it out to your constituents. This is doing the right thing. So I can start. So Kathy, did you send the board those definitions?
I sent them to Allison.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. I apologize. I thought you were sending them to the whole board.
All right.
Do you have them right there, Rob, or?
It'll take me a minute. Pam, why don't you drum
I
up
was
the
going to
band?
say I can email you.
I have them right here, but I can't share my screen.
Yeah, stand by. Go ahead, Pam.
As far as the committee goes, what kind of work that we've been up to, we have, we're down to about 35 stakeholders from throughout the school district in all buildings represented, some students from the high school as well. And we worked on coming to a definition of equity, which is what we're going to share with you. And we're just looking for reactions from different groups. So each building representative is taking it back and sharing it with their faculty and staff. We also developed a subcommittee last week that will focus on communication so that we can talk about how to get our word out and also to just keep building momentum and keep things on the front burner. At that point, we're also going to talk in that subcommittee how to engage more students so that we're getting students at the high school and at the middle school who are interested. Other work that the committee has done, we also talked about what our vision is for the future, what kind of things in each building we want kids and their families to be able to experience after we've been working on this for 5 years. You know, what will our programs look like? What will our schools look like? Let's see here, what else have we done? We found common themes throughout that. And then our next step is going to be to start working on a multi-year plan to make those things come to fruition. All within this, we need to make sure that we are vetting our practice. One other subcommittee worked on establishing gathering information and determining if there is an organization that can help us do an equity audit of our district, what that would entail. So we're working through that as well. So on your screen, you'll see 2 definitions of equity, one for adults and one for students.
And if I could just describe, there was a pretty extensive process to get down to these definitions. We looked at some foundational information and then had subgroups create definitions of their own. And then we tried to take all those definitions and create them into common language. And across the 40 some odd people that were at that meeting, we came down to these 2 definitions that we thought encompassed what the term equity would mean here in the district and what we thought we could work with as a work group. So we're looking this isn't a wordsmithing project. We're not looking to change it. We're just looking for if you think it's a workable definition.
Any reactions?
Yep.
Allison.
Yes, go ahead, Brittany.
Sorry. So I really, as I'm reading through the students one, I really find that, you know, kind of who they self-determine to be. I think that's, as a definition, I think that's wonderful. It allows them to know that it's them themselves that defines, how they want to present equality to everybody. I think it's a good working tool for them to kind of grow throughout the school years. So I really think they did you all did a good job on that.
Thank you.
Thanks for the feedback, Brittany. Anyone else have any comments? Just speak up since we are on the screen view so you can read and have a chance to talk. So I believe the group was just kind of looking for some feedback. Everyone was going to go to, my understanding from Kathy was everyone was going to go back to their respective represented units to kind of just get some feedback, so that this will be the basis of what you're working towards, shall we say, or the grounding definition. So,
yep.
Good. I like both of them very much. I'm just looking at this and where it says equal access to all and cultivating every student. I think one of the things is, and I don't know if it could be just every student's identity, I guess, and maybe that's just my thoughts, because I think we really need to recognize that every student has a different identity. That's just my thoughts.
Thank you.
thanks, Hurley. Anyone else?
Oh, Allison?
Yes, Matt.
Oh, I just wanted to comment on that idea of an audit from an expert outside organization that can come in with a critical eye and an unbiased view when you're, looking at the definition about for adults that you need to interrupt systemic practices. And, I like that thinking about who's going to come, who can help us identify those systemic practices that are problematic. So I was pleased to hear that.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Matt. Did you have anything to add, Kathy?
I'm really just looking for reactions.
Great. Thank you. And thank you for your time putting in, to work with the committee and avail yourself.
She also served on the subcommittee to look at our the equity audit resources. So she's been putting in double time.
Excellent. Thank you, Kathy.
Allison, it's Britt again. Just some more feedback for the adults. When we're looking at providing equal access to all and cultivating every student, maybe as we look at the definition, I always think sometimes that obviously it's parent interaction right now is a little bit more difficult than it would normally be, but how we could integrate that between adults themselves, between other adults in the buildings, or parents when they come in for meetings and stuff, because we always say that it starts at home. So kind of having that interaction between adults at that same level, because I think sometimes us as adults, we get in one room, we all have differences and whatnot, but if we can get the adults to not work with just every student, but really everybody within their surroundings.
It's a great point. Thank you.
Thanks, Brittany.
I want to just make a comment also about on either side of it is maybe something that will include also identifying where we're not kind of participating in this, and how do we identify when we are not participating in it, and especially when it comes in, when it's perspectives or points of view that do not affect us directly. And it's harder as adults or as students to understand something that is not part of our lives. as an individual, but the ability to participate with somebody else's perspective.
So do you mean awareness, being aware of when you are maybe not including in the definition, being aware or of being equitable and trying to be aware of when you're not being equitable?
Yeah, and because I think to be able to successfully increase to perform the first sentence, I think you have to have some type of a self-reflection and identification process, because until you do that and you expose those, you are not able to increase those possibilities of success for all or interrupt systemic practices. Because sometimes when it's not part of your life, you may not be aware that those exist, and you can't even engage in that yet. So like another layer of the how do we expose that? How do we identify it in ourselves and in our systems to be able to perform the beginning of the paragraph?
I heard you discuss reflection, understanding, and empathy as important factors to be able to enact an equitable system for our children and for our community.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so anyone else have anything to add for Equity Council? Okay, great. I think that will be the information that they were looking for. Thanks for bringing it to us.
Thank you, Kathy.
Keep up, absolutely. And any other old or new business to come before the board? Okay. So next on our agenda is executive session. So Joanne, do you have the language to go into executive session? A motion I'd entertain?
Sure. I'd like to make a motion to go into executive session to discuss contract negotiations, the premature disclosure of discussions would put the district at a disadvantage.
And is there a second?
I'll second. Oh,
I think I had Brittany first with the second. All those in favor? And any opposed? Oh, sorry, did we invite anyone in?
Oh, yes, we are. Shit, I have to make this again. Make that whole motion and also inviting Ted, Bill Mube, Bill Olson, Rob Bliss. Did I miss anybody, guys?
I think that's it.
Okay.
and I'll second again.
Sorry, people.
All those in favor?
Aye.
And any opposed?
Oh, no, I'm in favor.
I wasn't looking at you anymore anyway. I gave up. All right, so 8:36, and Joanne, I think I saw an email pop up earlier and a link for executive session.
Yep.
Okay, all right, so we will see all the board members in the other room. Thank you, bye.